Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm tackling a sensitive but incredibly important topic: violence against women. It's an issue that affects millions of women globally, and yet all too often the responsibility is placed on them to protect themselves, rather than addressing the root causes of the problem, which in the vast majority of cases is men. I think it's really important that we talk about something that is incredibly common, far more than most men probably realise, and explore what we can do to solve it. I believe that as a man, I have a responsibility to be part of the solution to this problem. Not because I'm a perpetrator of violence against women, but as we explore on the show, because it's not a problem women can solve on their own. We all have a role to play in making society safer, and that includes men stepping up in ways that go beyond just not being part of the problem. This is a difficult topic, but it's one I think we need to discuss, and just as importantly, one that has broader lessons. My guest on this episode, Amy Watson, is on a mission. Not just to raise awareness, she actively wants to change society. But what drives her to tackle this subject? How does she take on such an overwhelming problem? And why does she think her solution is actually going to work? You'll hear about her inspiration, her passion, and the way she's using a business to drive systemic change. Amy is the founder of HASSL, a newly launched organisation tackling the root causes of female harassment and violence against women. In our discussion, we explore how Amy is using a business to try and deliver that change, how she's funding her movement, how she's seeking to shift perspectives through engagement rather than confrontation, and what drives her deep commitment to the cause. We look at the traditional responses to violence against women, particularly from men. Why, for example, the phrase, "it's not all men," is unhelpful and misses the point, why prevention is more effective than reaction, and how one can use a business model to drive social change. We dive into Amy's experience of launching HASSL, the response that she's received, and why engaging men in the conversation is critical to real progress. And there are lessons in there for people interested in advocacy, making a difference, or running a business with a social purpose. Like Amy's business, this conversation is more than just raising awareness of an issue. We explore action, innovation, and a fundamental shift in how we could approach safety and equality. It's my discussion with Amy Watson on violence against women. Amy, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm really intrigued to talk to you about what you're doing, but to start us off, tell my listeners a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Amy. Hello. In October 2024, founded a brand called HASSL, which is basically an organisation that's all about tackling the root causes of female harassment. And yeah, I'm just coming on to talk about that really, and I guess the journey that led me to found HASSL and where I'm planning to take it in the future.
How did you come to realise this was a topic that you wanted to tackle?
Yeah, well, I guess there's kind of a long story and a short story. So I think from being really young, I always sort of my two passions were like social issues and entrepreneurship. Like, I think even before I kind of knew what it was, like I always had to have a project. Like I could never sit still. I just always had to be doing something. And then like throughout school and things, I did a lot of sort of voluntary advocacy work, things like that. And, did things like school council and whatever. And then also did quite a lot around business. So like I was in like an enterprise group at school and stuff like that. So I think I always knew that I like loved those two things and like they were my passions, and basically ended up I did my degree in entrepreneurship. So there's only like 3 unis, I think, in the country that do the course. So I ended up doing that as my degree. And whilst I was doing that at uni, basically was introduced to the idea of social impact brands, which I think now are quite a lot more common. But when I was at uni, it wasn't as much of a known thing. Like there was obviously organised brands that did sort of social impact initiatives with charities and things like that. But brands really built on the core mission of doing something positive for the world, but also using like the knowledge and the structure and I guess, yeah, the strategy and stuff behind successful businesses, rather than when we see a charity model, it's often obviously very much focused on donations and fundraising and that kind of thing. So yeah, I was introduced to it at uni and was like, this was what I was meant to do with my life. Fell in love. And yeah, I did whilst I was at uni, I ran a few of my own businesses. One was a social impact around homelessness, and was kind of my plan leaving uni, like my last year of uni. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And then COVID hit whilst I was in my final year, basically screwed up all my plans. Um, so yeah, I was at uni in Newcastle. My sort of planned business was a social impact around helping girls that were in poverty, finding safe spaces to like work, and if they were from like, yeah, sort of broken homes or anything like that, like had difficult home lives, just a space where they could come, meet people, gain skills, all that kind of stuff. So that was what it was based around. Obviously, a very face to face business, not smart to start in the middle of a pandemic. So ended up shielding at home with my family, and then was like, what am I doing? And long story, but randomly, very spontaneously moved to London and been here, should I say, for like 4.5 years now. Never left, just came and never left. So, yeah, and then I've just worked in various startups because I just felt like it was too risky to start a social impact brand or any brand, to be honest, during a pandemic. It was so much uncertainty, obviously, and yeah, I just got experience basically instead. And then my job that I was doing most recently, I was the COO of a health tech company, which was an amazing experience for me. And yeah, I didn't want to leave. Like, I loved my job. But in summer, I had an incident with harassment, basically, and I want to say quite low level on the scale of things. But basically, I was on my way to work about 10:30 in the morning, was on my way from another meeting, and someone was like pestering me and like asking me questions. They wouldn't leave me alone. And this went on for the 15-minute journey. No one stepped in to help. Everyone could clearly hear what was happening. I kept saying, no, not interested, please. I'm working. I had my earphones in, I had my head down, everything. And I guess, like, for me, it happens quite a lot. So it didn't. And basically, as I was getting off, like, he tried to grab me to get back and stuff. But, like, as I say, in the scheme of things, there's obviously a lot more traumatic things that can happen to people. But I think it was more the realization that all those people around me saw me, knew that I was clearly really uncomfortable, could hear, everyone's quiet on a train. They could hear what was happening, and no one stepped in to help. And obviously there was women around as well, which you kind of think they can relate more, like, and obviously I'm a relatively young girl, and it's just like no one helped me. And I think it really like made me realize that there's such a lack of understanding around like how to safely intervene and like what to do in that situation, because I knew that they weren't bad people, like, you know what I mean? But it is London. If you step in, things can escalate, and I get that. But I was just like, I would have felt a million times better if someone had just backed me up in that situation, or like I didn't feel like I was on my own. I felt scared the rest of the way trying to get to work because I didn't know if I was going to be followed and all that kind of stuff. And I also had so many people around me, like a lot of my colleagues were female. I have a sister who lives in London as well, like a lot of friends that live in London, and it happens to all of them all the time. It's such a common occurrence. And everything that I could find to solve that problem was just like women spending more time, energy, money on solving that problem. And it doesn't solve the problem, it just plasters over it. And they always find another way around it anyway. So I was kind of like, as I say, I was looking for solutions. I had a friend that reported to the police and with evidence, and had quite a bad experience as well, pretty much the week that it also happened to me. And yeah, it just basically kind of triggered something in my brain that I always knew I wanted to do social impact, but I just saw a gap so glaringly obvious to me that, yeah, I went on holiday and I was like, oh, I'll just start it whilst I'm on holiday. Because it was like my first break from work, and I was like, oh, it'll take me 2 years, 3 years to get any kind of traction. And, I'll work in my job that I love for a long time. And yeah, it just kind of exploded more than I could have imagined. So yeah, four and a bit months later, here I am. So yeah, that's the very long story of how I guess I got to this point with HASSL.
And I love the framing of the problem as being the traditional solutions, and I use that term very, very loosely, is we'll deal with it when it happens, or we'll try and tamp it down a bit. But there's this sort of expectation that it will happen. And you've looked at this thing and just gone, well, we need to stop it happening in the first place, right? Because, rape alarms as an example, great, helpful, well-intentioned, but doesn't get to the core root. And so what you're looking at doing is saying, I want to stop this from happening in the first place. So we need to design things and build the business around that.
Definitely. I think like my ethos in general when it comes to pretty much any social issue is that prevention is better than sort of what's the word? Like, yeah, prevention is better than cure afterwards. Like that's kind of my mentality when it comes to anything, whether it's educational inequality or health inequality or racism or homophobia or whatever. Obviously, all of these are very interlinked as well, like poverty, all that kind of stuff. Like you see, because of the way that the media like to frame things and whatever, that we're often pinning minorities against one another. And again, it's not solving, it's just causing like more pain for everyone. And it's not actually getting to the root of what's happening. And I think there's certain issues that we're better at than others in tackling root causes, but we always find that they're more effective, right? Like you end up spending a lot less money in the long term because you prevent something from happening. I'll give an example. Like my mum was a dietitian who worked in public health, and a lot of her work was around like preventing children from becoming overweight by teaching how to cook and all that kind of stuff. And like generally just like health education on what is good for you and what's nutritious and all that kind of stuff. And that is much cheaper in the long run than once someone hits that point, they cost the NHS a lot of money. They have a lot of medical issues, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's so important, but we often find obviously with governments and whatever, that quick plaster is the preferred method because it gets you results that you can talk about. Like something that's going to take 20 years when they're in government for a few is not in their best interest without trying to make them sound too devious or whatever. But you know what I mean? So I think it really unfortunately takes like external organizations sometimes to come in and be like, I see the long-term vision of this. I'm going to sustain this myself. This is not for points or to keep myself in power or anything like that. This is like a long-term systemic change. And yeah, I just found like it wasn't happening from an authority perspective, to be honest, anywhere across the world. Like there are some countries that do it better than others, but it's such a universal problem for women, right? Like I've over 100 countries, like people in over 100 countries that have signed up, that have done surveys, whatever. It's so sad, but it happens regardless of economic status, location, culture, everything. It's such a universal problem. So that's, yeah, why my focus is so much around root causes and not, as you say, just like these quick fixes that don't really work.
And so you've decided this is your mission. You've recognized that you want to deal with the problem as opposed to papering over the cracks. What's the strategy in thinking about how do I take this impetus and turn it into a business?
Yeah, so for me, like, firstly, it's structured as a social enterprise. So the plan is always that profits are reinvested into social impact initiatives. So any initiatives that further the progress of women's safety. But it does allow us a lot more flexibility in terms of like generating our own revenue streams and being a bit more like, one of the things that I really wanted to be was quite unapologetic in our branding and really talk about things that other people aren't talking about. So for that to happen, you have to be a bit more of your own entity and not have higher powers that you're kind of trying to lean to their agendas as well. So even right from the beginning, I was like, I know I could get investment for this, but I want to avoid it as much as possible because you can get social impact investors that obviously align with your mission, but there's still always like an element of profit focus there. And I was so like committed to what we're doing that I just never want to stray at all from like the core mission. So I'm going to do everything, basically spending no money if I can. So to date, we've got to where we are with less than £2,000 spent in total on everything because I just did everything myself. Just learn whatever I could learn and, lent on amazing resources from like my university and stuff like that have really supported me. And just kind of prove like, I think it's so important to get proof of concept, proof of demand. And also for me, I was like, there's never going to be mass change or mass adoption to, I guess, our end goal product, which I can talk about a bit later, but there's never going to be mass adoption of it if we don't have this really strong community, this really strong brand identity. yeah, just really clear in like who we are and that kind of thing. And it's almost like a bottom up approach that we can like, as a mass, put pressure upwards rather than kind of just going to senior people first and taking forever to like hammer them down. So yeah, it's kind of trying to become like a problem that can't be ignored anymore, if that makes sense, because there's so much pressure. So yeah, my initial strategy was like, firstly, be a bit more, I don't want to say extreme, but a bit more vocal about stuff from like a feminist perspective, just to get in those, the sort of me of the friendship group, the people who are like very hardcore passionate about what I'm doing, advocate already. And that's allowed us to build, we launched our ambassador platform like 3 weeks ago, and we're at nearly 650 ambassadors that are amazing from all walks of life. Some are students, some are like professionals, and I've got this incredible bank of people that are amazing and want to help and can propel the mission. And that's one of many ways that we can have this like mass reach, hopefully relatively quickly. So yeah, ambassador platform wasn't supposed to launch till stage 3, but there were so many people that wanted to help. I was like, gotta get this out. So yeah, that's where we're at. Sorry, I've got a bit like, oh,
This is fascinating. I'm loving hearing, because I think what you're talking about here is not following a business strategy that's conventional. You're bringing entrepreneurial thinking to, I guess, what is a sort of protest mission. You want to affect change. And so normally people would go on demonstrations, and what you're doing is thinking, well, how do I use a vehicle of a business to get that across? And so I love the fact that there isn't a predefined script, that you're bringing business thinking to something that's driven from your heart, that you believe passionately in. And so I would almost be surprised if you were following a sort of, because as we know, any plan that you develop is going to, it was going to hit obstacles and stick slavishly to the plan, and you're missing the opportunity to get some of these things. So I love the fact that, for example, you go, we're going to have an ambassador program. Oh, okay. The opportunity for doing that seems to be here now. So let's ignore what the original plan was, and we'll go very entrepreneurially. We'll pivot and we'll push that in first. So I think all the things you're talking about and the explanation makes perfect sense.
and like, I think my experience personally is like, I guess bootstrapping, because when I did my own initiatives, like I just maximized like everything I knew about organic marketing. As I say, just did everything myself, like learned things rather than paid someone to do it. And also, I think very much like I used to be very perfectionist in my approach, and now I'm a lot more, thanks to the founder of my last company, I'm a lot more, it's better to get it done like 80%. And as long as no one's going to get hurt or whatever in the process, like just get it out and learn, because I think that's so important. And I struggled with that for a long time because I mean, I am a perfectionist. I would definitely say I'm a perfectionist, but I've managed to rein it in a lot more, I think. And it just, like you said, it makes you able to pivot. And I think like it's so hard to explain. And when I said this to my parents, when like I first came up with the idea, I was like, it's so clear in my brain. Like, I don't even know how to explain it to you. Like, I have like, I knew it was just everything that I wanted, like how I wanted it to happen. The stage is everything. And not that they doubted me or anything, but they were just like, okay, okay. And then I think, yeah, it just took off more than probably more than anyone expected. But um, I've always had like, it's so hard to explain, because I just think this is exactly what I was meant to do. This is what every single thing that I've done in my life led up to. And I didn't know for a long time what I was going to end up doing, but it's, it's almost just like an extension of me. I can't really describe it. So it's so like natural for me to do this. And yeah, it's just like I have products, initiatives, whatever for the next 50 years. Like I have so many ideas, like that it's just, yeah, I'm just excited to launch, grow the team, like get to where, get all those into motion. Cause obviously I only have so many hours in the day, and yeah, there's already a lot to do. So I'm very excited for, yeah, like there's so many opportunities coming at us and stuff. And yeah, excited for some help so we can really like make the most of them, really.
And you alluded to it, but I'm not asking you to give a detailed plan, because as we know, that's going to be challenging. But what is the business going to do, and how is it going to be a business as opposed to just a sort of lobbyist or protest or campaigning group?
Okay, so we have at the moment a 5-stage plan. So our first stage was just raising awareness, which was basically starting up all the socials, the online survey, and our WhatsApp community. So in the 4 months since I started it, we have more than 250,000 followers now across socials. We have,
Which is insane. I mean, it's like incredible, right?
yeah, it's not what I expected, but it also just shows how much demand. Unfortunately, like, it's very sad. Every day it's sad, but also, it's a two-sided thing because on one side, I'm happy for the growth. On the other side, I'm so sad that there's so much demand for this. But yes, we have a WhatsApp community, which is nearly 900 people now, I think. And our survey, which is almost 4,000 people have done our survey in over 100 countries, which is all about experiences, suggestions, like just ideas to shape HASSL and make sure it's every product like meets as much as possible what people want and what people need. So that was like the stage one. Stage two is what I'm launching in literally, well, I don't know how long. It's on the 1st of March. So whenever this goes live, but on the 1st of March. So this is like our first revenue streams. One is basically merch that is designed to be very neutral, minimalist, sort of a unisex so anyone can buy it, but it's also supposed to be very Instagrammable, all that kind of stuff. So it really raises awareness at the same time. And the second thing is workplace training programs. And this isn't for harassment in the workplace. This is on how to safely intervene as bystanders and just harassment awareness in general. So again, it's funded by businesses for employees. It also means that kind of there isn't this opt-out thing. Like, it's mandatory if they provide it to their team. And it makes the world safer for everyone because they're getting the training right. And over time, it educates a lot of people. Also provides funding to keep other initiatives free that we're going to be launching in future. Stage 3 is basically, I'm trying to think what the overarching umbrella term was for it, but there's 3 things. So we're launching viral campaigns, which we're already in talks of partnering with artists and I guess celebrities and things like that on these viral campaigns to basically raise awareness of the problem. Again, educate, that kind of thing. Second is free educational resources that are going to be on the website. Anyone can download them. Any tools or tech that directly help people are going to be free of use to the end user. So that's why we have all these revenue streams. I'm never going to charge women to be safe. I'm never going to charge men to learn more about being better allies. Like, that is not the case. So this is why we have to have these revenue streams. We're also working on brand partnerships. So we're in talks with quite a lot of big brands. Again, they will be funding these. So it's another way that the member of the public doesn't have to directly pay for it. And yeah, just keep it free. Fourth stage is free education programs in schools. So that is especially like for younger boys around consent, around systemic sexism, things like that. And kind of making sure these behaviors are tackled before they even get to the point of red pill content on the internet and all this kind of stuff. So that's a really key part of what we're doing. And again, like, this is why we're building these funding streams at the same time, because I don't want anyone to be like, we can't afford this as a school, or it is just so important. It needs to be free of charge to the end user. So again, this is why we're bringing in big companies, big brands, businesses, whatever, where they can potentially spare a bit more. And it's always just those who can afford to help that pay. And it's never a privilege to use something, right? Like, it's just equal access for people. And then the final stage is we are basically working on, which I can't tell like too much information because of IP and everything, but some reporting tech, which could completely change the way that people report incidents in terms of making it quicker, safer, easier, basically leading to, the intention is to lead to higher conviction rates, because we know that now the reporting rates are so low compared to how often this actually happens, and conviction rates are so low. And normally it's one person's word against another. This is, without going into too much detail, a way of building a case of multiple people against the same person, but removing the, I guess, difficulty of having to go and report it maybe as soon as it happens, having to file something that feels really real and formal, and you have to go and talk to police that you might not feel understand or empathize. So we're already working with, a lot of people that work in like cybersecurity, legal tech, like all this kind of stuff, and talking to police forces to basically create something that, as I say, like, yes, it's a big ask and a big hope, but that's why it's so important to build this mass audience that we can potentially have mass adoption once we launch the tech. So that was kind of like, that's the not end goal, because we'll continue to launch a lot more stuff. And obviously we've got other funding streams in the pipeline and everything. But yeah, it's so important to me to keep stuff free of charge. Like, that's the really big key part of it. So yeah.
And this is a really big mission. And I'm struck by not an irony, but it's a sort of success would be no need for the business to exist anymore, which is interesting, right? You'd be delighted if this thing succeeded. And of course, we know the scale of the ambition is so big that that's not, you're not going to immediately solve this problem.
In my lifetime, unfortunately. And also, there's so many other avenues that I would love to expand into. Like, we're very focused on public harassment and public incidents of assault, harassment, catcalling, whatever, in public spaces. But there is obviously a whole, in the UK alone, they've declared a national emergency of violence against women, right? And there is, domestic violence is growing. It's awful. Like, there is so much that needs to be done on that side of things. Online harassment is becoming, because of the nature of the world we now live in, becoming an ever-growing huge problem. Like, there's so many other spaces that we can go into with this thing that we're doing right now. It's like, and then just generally, like, gender inequality in so many spaces that, unfortunately, there is never going to be, not for a very long time, an end to the work that we need to do and we can do. So it's just about, like, continuously diversifying, addressing new problems. And I'm sure by the time, there'll be very much new problems, like with AI and stuff, that we're already seeing a lot of problems with that in terms of, like, creating fake images of nude women and things like this. So, there's going to be new problems as well with the way that the world is changing. So yeah, I don't foresee an end, unfortunately, to HASSL, but that would be the dream. Yeah, if I could wrap it up, and I'd love to go tackle something else, because homelessness is a big thing for me as well. So I'd love to do something around that at some point, but one at a time.
And talk to me a little bit about the social. I mean, you talked about the tone of voice and the approach here. And, when I came across your social media, how I discovered you, you're quite uncompromising in the statements that you make, and it's intentionally punchy. So that's an interesting position to take, because on the one hand, you will get people, that clearly will attract people. The risk, I guess, is that other people will be turned off by that. How are you thinking about the balance of those things?
So again, it's something that I thought through so much in the strategy, right? It's so fundamental. And my idea was always, as I say, like, I don't want to say more extreme, but more obvious in the marketing to begin with, because you have to first engage those people that are going to be your ambassadors, that are going to be the ones that tell their parents, tell their friends, their family, that really, like, push the mission forward. Like, they are the first people, and they are the people that I feel like now we have a really good community of. If you go in too soft, you're not going to engage those people, and you're also not going to engage the people that aren't ready to hear it yet. So you're a bit like flailing around in the middle. So it was always my intention to do that. We're already starting to move to more content, which is about how to be allies. One of our amazing ambassadors did one the other day, which got, I think it was on like 500,000 views or something already. And it was basically her going for a run and saying, and it was her boyfriend filmed it from his point of view of saying, I have to go for a run with her because she doesn't feel safe and she will get harassed. And that's male privilege. So we're starting to lean into now, maybe softer content is maybe the word, but more like how you can help, how you can be an ally, more just relatable day-to-day scenarios that, again, like, I did a LinkedIn post about this the other day, but we can't ignore the fact that the majority of violence against women is, I wouldn't say conducted, is done by men, right? Like, that men are the perpetrators, unfortunately. And yes, these things happen to men as well, but still the majority of victims, even if they are men, the perpetrators are still men. So it's still a problem within, and I'm not saying men as individuals, I'm saying men as a group, as a collective, right? And this is the thing, like everything in HASSL is, so our social media obviously is gonna right now engage those who are really strong or who are related to people who are very involved and ingrained in what we're doing. And as I say, slowly we're starting to branch out, not to necessarily make the content any less impactful, but even all our marketing campaigns that we're going to be launching, they're very much designed around real life day to day and around mental load, not kind of a man going and attacking a woman in the street. Because unfortunately, people will switch off because they'll be like, I don't attack women in the street, so this is not for me, right? And I understand that. I think the thing that we fail to, or the thing that maybe it's harder for men especially to appreciate, is the mental load that goes into this day to day. It's not just when it happens, during, after, it's before, because every day you do things as a woman subconsciously, even, that is drilled into you to like keep yourself safe, right? And there's I think there's more access for men to start appreciating what women in their lives day to day just think about, rather than saying like, okay, I don't attack women, so it's not my problem. Just kind of being like, oh, and it shouldn't be that it has to be a relative or a colleague or whatever, but oh, every morning my colleagues think about this when they're going to work that I don't think about. And it starts to create a much more accessible conversation, I think, than, as I say, kind of, without disrespecting any charities, because I think, everyone does amazing work. There is like domestic violence charities that do just show, very graphic, traumatic incidents. And if people don't do that, they will immediately just be like, this is not for me. Whereas this is just a thing that everyone, women included, there is a lot of internalized misogyny. There is a lot of victim blaming that comes from women as well. It's not that. It's everyone needs to be involved in creating a solution. And yeah, also like HASSL initiatives are very much designed. So I have this scale of men especially, but women also sit less stretched out, but along this scale too. And obviously you've got men who are advocates that are going out and going to protests and doing all that stuff and just get it. And then you've got men who would never do something and they would maybe call out a situation, but they don't actively participate. Then you've got men who would never do anything but don't particularly recognize or engage with the problem. You've got this whole scale, right, all the way to like people who are perpetrators of the problem. And all our initiatives are designed around some part of that scale, because ideally I want to move everyone at least up one level on that scale. So perpetrators that are like, whatever your mindset is on why they do that. Some people will never not do it, right? There will always be people in this world that do bad things, unfortunately. And this is why we're doing stuff around the reporting tech, because you have to change external factors. You're never, ever going to change them. But everyone else on that scale, by educating, by, as I say, getting to young boys before they maybe develop these mindsets, or going into workplaces where they kind of can't opt out, and we talk to them in a very accessible way, not in like a, you're to blame, it's your fault, that's it. Because it's completely designed the opposite way to that, almost like a really designed around engaging, around understanding, all that kind of stuff. And just, as I say, about moving, if I could just move everyone up one level on that scale, that is, because I'm not expecting someone to go from like assaulting women in the street to becoming like an advocate, and a HASSL ambassador. Like, I'm not unrealistic. But it's just like, even if everyone, or even if some men just moved up one on that scale, the world would be so much safer. Like, the impact that could have would be massive. As I say, if one person had just come up when I was being harassed and said, even just distracted them, this is the thing, like just distracted him and said, oh, what's the time? Or, oh, like pretended they know me, so that it just deterred them a little bit, that could have made all the difference to me feeling safe. So yeah, again, really long explanation, but
No, perfect. So many things I want to pick up, but I love this idea of a scale, because I think often everybody gets lumped into the same category. And, therefore you try and speak to, either you're speaking to people who won't listen, or you're speaking to a person who doesn't exist, right? As a sort of avatar of someone. And I love this idea of like, this is just about improving things. So if we can take people somewhere better than where they are today, that's a form of success. And I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, because it's not about, if I thought about it in sort of ridiculous alternative context, it's not like converting them to a religion. It's literally just like, can I shove you along a little bit and change your perspective on things and therefore your behavior?
Exactly. And it makes it a lot more measurable as well. Like, I think it's very important when you're doing this work that, whilst human nature is very hard to measure, and especially something that's obviously on this scale, part of the workplace training has this scale part within it where people can kind of honestly put themselves on where they think they are. And then hopefully by the end of those few hours, there's somewhere to moving towards that next point on the scale, right? And that's like a good way to more tangibly measure impact, especially in the beginning. And yeah, as you say, like the yes, it happens where people go from being like extremely racist to, extremely pro equality and everything. But usually it's a slower transition. And it's tricky because, like, obviously with what I'm doing, there are incredible women that are involved that have pretty much never had a good male figure in their life, which is so sad, but is unfortunately the case for a lot of women, right? Like, they've always been in abusive relationships. They might have not had a present father, or they've been abused by father, uncle, whatever. And it's very hard for them to step out. I'm not even saying of this, like, they're not necessarily man hating, but just not knowing any men that are good is really warps your perspective on the world, right? I'm very lucky that I have a lot of very positive male figures in my life. My dad, my friends, like, my friends' partners and things like that. So I definitely have like a less, I don't want to say cynical view, but I have probably a more like even view of, the scale of what we're working with, right? But I also know that with the best will in the world, you're never going to know what it feels like to be a woman, because you've never been in that situation. And it is all about like, it is difficult, and say, because there's some women who just want you to go out and be like, not even bother with men, because they're so traumatized by it that they're like, you're never going to change them, just leave it. But for me, like, the mission of HASSL and the mission of why, like, and the idea of why it should be different is because you see these charities and organizations that are trying to tackle these things, but again, mainly focused on like solutions, so counseling, support afterwards, and things like that. And they, again, like, very much just appeal to women. And I tried to do everything that I could to make generally the tone of voice is like quite chatty and like not funny, but kind of humorous, a little bit sarcastic. The coloring is very neutral, trying to make it very accessible for like men and women. We're not sticking like pink girl power stuff everywhere, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's very much designed that whether you like it or not, as a man, there is something that you will either be forced to be involved with at some point, hopefully, or you will come around to the idea and be involved. And yeah, I think there's so many kind of nuances to why everything is designed the way it is, and like why it hopefully, a lot of people doubt it. Obviously, they're like, you're never going to do anything, you're never going to make a difference, whatever. And I appreciate the cynicism. Like, is a shit world out there, right? Like, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. And also, you see a lot of people that do this work and it's not really to actually make a change. It's just like more of like a status thing or whatever. And like, I feel it so deeply inside of me that like, this is what I want to do. It's all I talk about. If you meet anyone that knows me, is I don't shut up about it. So I hope that people can vouch for the fact that, like, that this is all I want to do. And it's hard to say because it sounds really dramatic, but I'm trying to do something in a way that's like never really been done before. So it probably sounds kind of like really delusional to people and like crazy, but I'm hoping that I'm starting to prove the value in like the planning and the strategy, and like everything is thought through in that way. And like everything comes back to those like core goals of like, men have to be involved if we want to get to any kind of real solution. it has to be rooted in diversity and equality, like, which is just stuff that is very much my personal values anyway. So it's not difficult, but again, like, it's very easy for like trans women to be excluded from these conversations and this kind of stuff. And like, no, everything, like every single time I do something, I come back like, does it meet this? Does it do that? It's so important. So yeah, whilst it might seem kind of insane, it's really hard to explain, but I know what I'm doing. Like, I have it so thought through.
And I kind of think it's interesting when people criticize that because, number one, there are lots of examples where people have taken on big challenges and succeeded against all. And of course, there are tons of people that have taken on big challenges and failed completely. But I would argue if nobody ever attempts to do those things, we're never going to solve those problems. And it's kind of like, well, so what if you fail, right? I was looking at it saying, good luck with it, go for it, right? It might not work out, but the only way you're going to find out is by doing it. And are you causing any harm on the way to trying to solve the problem? I can't, unless you increased the level of violence against women, you go out there and you piss off so many men that you turn them into the very thing you're trying to prevent. I can't see how it can do any harm. So I'm sort of like, for me, the criticism of why you're trying to tackle this big topic seems a bit dark because you're not asking for money from anyone, whether you might mislead them about the thing. You're going for it in a way that feels authentic to you. You seem to me to be doing it for exactly the right reasons. And you're just, I think we do need a little bit of imagination, a little bit of dreaming, and a little bit of sort of vision and persistence to get things done. If we look at progress in society, that's happened from people who have tackled things they were probably told not to do. So, to my perspective, anyone that turns around and says, "Why are you trying to do this?" That's delusional. It's missing the point because actually, well, what's the downside? It's your, if anything, it's your time that you're wasting. If you want to look at it that way, and who cares? That's your time to do what you want with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, like, I don't think it necessarily comes from a bad place. I think it comes from, being let down time and time again, or just seeing something that gives you hope and then it doesn't. And I completely get that. And I think this is why I'm so like, as much as I'm very, like, I've never really, what's the word? Like, when I was younger, I had like a bit of a social media platform and I absolutely hated it. I hated being anyone knowing anything about me. And like, you get a lot of judgment, obviously, and people like to criticize everything. And I was like, never again. And I stopped that and I never did. And like, even on my personal Instagram, like, I post maybe once every 2 years, if that. Like, I'm so like not in that space, but I've been doing quite a lot more, like, I guess, just stuff on like LinkedIn and like TikTok and stuff, because I just think it's such like an internal battle because I don't want to do it because, I've already got a lot of abuse, and mainly from like trolls and things, not like actual people who like, their opinion really matters to me. But I think it's so important when you're doing something like this that people know the person behind it. And like, yeah, I'm not going to convince everyone I'm doing it for the right reasons, but at least there's a face to it. At least they can kind of see my journey, see I always have done stuff like this. I've always wanted to do stuff like this. Like, if I wanted to make money, I would have just stayed in my old job or gone, you know what I mean? Like, this is not going to make me lots of money, and that's like never been the plan. And yeah, I think it's just kind of, you're always going to struggle with that, right? Like, there's always going to be people that doubt you. And yeah, like you said, I think, I was talking to my mum about it and I was like, even if I quit this tomorrow, the amount of people, like, I've had thousands of messages or things from people saying this has changed my life. I haven't done anything. Like, to me, I've not even done anything yet because I haven't even launched it, right? And I'm like, just you wait. Like, if you think but it's also like, I've already made some impact, like, even just in these 4 months. And like you said, it can't be a bad thing. Like, if people just saying they feel heard, they finally feel like every narrative they see is just like, it's your fault if this happened, like, you didn't do enough, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, just to open up that narrative of like, if someone gets murdered, we don't go, well, what were they wearing? Like, that's not ever a thing. But for some reason, when we come to there's so much victim blaming when it comes to anything around like sexual harassment or assault. And it's like, there's this thing and it's like, oh, if I'm walking around without a helmet on, does that mean you can smash my skull in? Like, no, that's not how the world works. But for some reason, we've got this very warped view, and there's a lot of reasons for that, obviously. But we just need, it's time. It's time to like change this. And, this is part of the reason why people don't report and people don't come forward. And, I posted something the other day that was like, imagine what we don't hear, because we only hear the stuff that people can bear to talk about, right? Which is usually the lesser traumatic stuff. Like, imagine all the stuff that we don't hear. And imagine the stuff that, from especially previous generations that have never come up because there's never been a space to even remotely feel like it's okay to talk about it. So, yeah, as I say, like, for me, I was never like, oh, like, even the survey, like, people say, like, this has been so good. Like, I feel like you're listening to me, like, you asking the right questions. And it's like, to me, that was such a small, tiny thing. There was just more, you know what I mean? And it's just like, you kind of never realize how much impact you can have on, even by doing quite small things. And that's like part of the ambassador stuff as well, is like, anyone can make change and anyone can make an impact. And it's just giving people like equal opportunity to do that, really. Because obviously some people don't have the resources or whatever. Like, I am privileged that I could quit my job and risk not having a salary for a year or whatever. And just like, yeah, I have parents. If I end up not being able to afford rent, I can go live at home and that kind of thing. So, the ambassador stuff is all about trying to give as much equal opportunity as possible to people, that, giving them support to make change within their community, giving them resources. Like, at some point, once we start the funding streams, there's going to be a pot for ambassadors, so they can apply to do things within like their university. Say they want to start like a girls running club at night or something, and they need just like a bit of money or whatever. Like, I want to enable other people to do that, because that's how you get mass change, like, not from a few people.
Let's tackle a topic that comes up quite frequently, which is what I'll simply summarize as the not all men response, which is this simple idea. And I will fully admit that I was not a full subscriber to that, but it was sort of the place I put it, which is simply to say that I recognize there is a problem. There are some awful people out there, and we should absolutely do something about that. But you're coming and you're talking to men as if all of us are part of the problem. I've come on the journey to solve that problem, but I want to, let's hear it from you as to why that, why is that not a smart way to look at the world?
I think there's so many different aspects to this. And like you said, it's a statement that comes up all the time. And I think I'll go through a few different, I guess, parts to it. But I think the first thing is like, when we're referring to men, when we say, oh, men harm women, right? We're not saying every man. That otherwise we'd say every man. It's men in general, because 97% plus of the violence against women is done by men, right? That is a statistical probability that is by a man. I think the thing is, like, it's also kind of like, why is your bigger thing worrying about being targeted rather than the fact that there's so much violence against women? And I think you kind of have to, like, say like me, for example, like, if someone goes, oh, white people are really racist, I'm like, yeah, they are. Does that offend me in one bit? No, I'm white. I know that I am not racist. And I know that, I mean, I could always do more, absolutely, to be more educated on it. But I know that I'm actively the other way inclined. And so I would never, ever take it personally. Or if someone said something about English people, British people, that was like, British people are racist, whatever. Yeah, I agree. Because it's about systemically, it's about, as a collective, we have this problem. It's not saying that individuals within that group aren't, and many individuals aren't different to that. But as a collective, it's a systemic problem with men causing violence against women, right? So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, we talk about not all men. And yes, it's not all men, but all men can help as much as all women can help. And most men, unfortunately, fall on a spectrum, or on a scale, should I say, where they aren't doing as much as they could. And without realizing it a lot of the time, as I say, even the men in my life that are very, very open, very educated on this stuff, whatever, there is still more they could do. firstly, are never going to understand it firsthand because they're never going to be in that situation as a woman. Secondly, like, I have conversations all the time, and it's things that, like, I didn't realize for so long because that's the world we live in. But you start to think, like, why do we do this? Why do we do this to women? And, like, one of the posts that actually kind of propelled HASSL quite early on was one I did about terms that we use to describe people. And we often, like, if you're a single parent, like, single mum has a very negative connotation, single dad doesn't. Single dad often has a much more heroic connotation to it. And there's a lot of examples of this where it's actually the majority of the time, the man within that situation has left, or it's not, she's the one who stayed. The single mum is the one who stayed in that situation, but all the aggression is put towards her and the negative connotation is put towards her. And there's, like, a lot of terms like that, right? Like, there's a quite a common term like daddy issues, which is a negative term used to describe especially girls that don't have a good father figure in their life. And it's kind of like, but we're talking about men here. That's not her fault, but that word is used to describe women. And there's so many things like that that are so ingrained into us that I never thought about until I, like, really started reading and, like, understanding and everything. And I think also working in health, there's such a major inequality when it comes to health in terms of men and women. And I think it was last year where it came out that they'd never actually tested feminine hygiene products with actual blood, which is insane, right? Like, most women use them at some point in their lives for an extended period. We spend a lot of money on it. And, people have been saying for so long that they're not up to scratch. And then we find out that they've never actually even been tested on the thing that they're supposed to be used for. And it's similar with crash test dummies. There was a thing that women were never actually used as crash test dummies. Men were always the default. So women tended to be injured far more in car accidents because they have a different anatomy and they're sat at a different height in a car. So when crashes happen, their body is impacted differently. But because the car is designed around men to be safe in an accident and not women, the outcome are much worse for women. And there's just so many things like this that you realize that the whole world is designed around men. And that is because historically men were in positions of power. So naturally you would design the world around yourself, even in a non-selfish way, because that's what you know. And yeah, it's just the more and more you look into these things, the more you realize. And it's the same, as I say, same with racism or whatever. It's like people who experience racism can say it till they're blue in the face. But if people who are not oppressed by their race don't step in and help, we're never going to solve the problem. Because again, those people tend to be in more positions of power. We know this. So there's so many different strands to the statement.
I think this is really interesting because I always used to feel targeted. And to your point, I do think there's a case. If somebody says something like all men are awful, and that is talking about me, and I can kind of make an argument that says, well, that's not right. But the way that you're phrasing it and the way generally these, the messaging you're putting across is literally saying there is a problem here. It is men doing this by and large, and that's the thing that we want to target. And therefore, we're not saying you've done it, but I think it's worth recognizing that, and this is why I love your scale. We all have the capability of, whether that's being racist, sexist, engaging in violence, we all have it within us on some level. So even if we naturally hang out in one bit of the scale that's the nicer end of the spectrum, we can, under certain circumstances, that might involve alcohol, it might involve being put in a particular situation, we might just have an off day, we can move ourselves along that scale to the wrong place. And so I look at it and say, actually, it's a little bit like if you were a football fan and some fellow fans engaged in violence, you would feel embarrassed. And I take the same view with the whole men and saying, if there are men out there doing something, then they're not necessarily officially doing it in my name. But the bottom line is that has an impact on me, because what it means is there are women who don't know whether I'm one of them or whether I'm not one of them. And therefore, if they walk down the street and they see me, they naturally have to be suspicious. So the behavior of these other people does actually impact me directly because it impacts people's perception of my group of people. And so I think for me, it was the realization as soon as I sort of went, okay, I don't have to take this personally, but I do have to recognize that my personal brand, the perception that people who don't know me have of me is tainted by these people. That should give me cause for concern. I don't have to own their behavior, but I do have to actually recognize that it's having an impact on me. And I shouldn't, I shouldn't just be sitting there going, that's okay for people to be kind of doing that, not necessarily in my name, but in terms of my subset of the species. And then the second thing I realized, which is a great little quote where there's that protest quote where people sort of say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, which I understand logically, but is unhelpful, I think, in the sense of it's sort of us and them. But the opposite is if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. And so I look at that and say, that's a call to action to say, actually, it's only men that are probably going to be capable of stopping other men from doing silly things. So we need to jump in and help for that reason as well. So if I take those two arguments, that's a very, very strong case. And therefore, for me, the whole not all men thing falls out of the way because it's missing the point of both of those arguments.
Yeah, I think there is definitely, like with everything, there's always going to be some people that, as I say, especially if they've had really negative experiences and never had a positive experience, that they're going to say, all men do X, Y, and Z. Just like there'll be men that say all women do X, Y, and Z, right? Like that's always going to happen. But like when we're referring to men, again, it's like men as a group systemically as a historical, like historically all of the things that have happened that have led us to this point, rather than men as individuals. As I say, like I have friends, I have dad, like I have people that I'm very close to that are men that I know don't do these things, but also that could do more. I'm doing this, I could still do more. Like there's still more I could do. And there's still a situation that I've been in where I'm like, I should have done more in that situation. And not just around harassment, like around anything. But yeah, I think it's just like you said, I think it's so important to be like, am I offended, or is it that I'm being grouped with these people? And if so, should I not be more angry at the fact that these people are tainting my group? Like you said, I think the football fan thing is because they would go out and say, I don't know, Manchester United fans did this. Manchester United fans kicked off a whatever other team. It doesn't mean all fans. It's not saying every single person who supports Manchester United went and did this thing. It's just saying that this is a common denominator that groups them together. And not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I also see so much around immigration, around people from different cultures. And it's one of the favorite things is to go, well, you were okay with immigration, so it's your fault that there's violent men here. And it's like the common denominator is never the color of their skin. It's always their gender. It's always that they're a man. That is the reality of it. Yes, there are people, but there are men of all backgrounds. And from my personal experience, it's always been, not always, but the majority of the cases it has been white men, right? It has been people that I'm pretty sure are British. And, if you look at statistics, there's not statistically different ethnicities or backgrounds or whatever that do this more. It's just that the media reports it more. There's grooming gangs of white people, but they don't get pushed in the media and say because it doesn't push this message of we need to hate people who have a different skin color or whatever they want to push. And it's really frustrating because I think, again, like it's like, don't pretend you care about women's safety just to push that agenda. It's very similar to the trans argument of we shouldn't have trans women in bathrooms because they could pretend to be men and go and attack women. And it's like, women are getting attacked every single day. Men don't need to dress up as women to go and attack women. It happens regardless, and you've never cared about it until this point in time. So don't start using it just to push an anti-trans agenda. There's this thing about, in America especially, about drag queens, and we can't have children in drag shows and whatever. And it's like, if you had to put me in a room full of men, I would choose drag queens any day of the week because I've never felt safer around men than with drag queens who identify still as men. It's just like there's only this care. A lot of the time, there's only this care about women's safety when it's to push this other agenda. And it really frustrates me because I think it's just like hate on more hate on more hate. And it's like, if we actually go and look at the common denominator, as much as you don't want to say all men, and it isn't all men, it's pretty much always a man. And that's the point. And I think it is frustrating because I think it's used quite a lot. Women's safety is used quite a lot as almost like a tool to push other things, and is always missing the point of like what is actually happening, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of a separate thing, but I just see it so often as a way to push more like racism or transphobia or whatever it is. Men don't have to. They don't have to dress as women. Do you think people would go to that extent where they can just do it out there on the street and nothing's going to happen to them? It's just very flawed logic, in my opinion. But
I think what's very clear is that you've thought about this. And I really like the fact that when you talked about the messaging, you started off by saying, look, I've got to get the people that already get it. I need to win over those allies, those people that are there. And then we move and we shift once we've got that. So you're deploying scalability in this, because one of the questions I was going to have for you is to say, well, why are you not straight away targeting the younger version of me, right? That would have thought some of these things, that was persuadable. But I think your argument's very good, which is we'll get some people on board. Sure, I'm going to have some, I'll use a slightly provocative term, fundamentalists who are going to, want to argue an extreme position. But you're going to get some people in there that are already committed. That gives you your scale. And then you can start to think about, well, how do we shift the messaging slightly? But there is a brand consistency throughout it, but you're going to be targeting a slightly different bit as you go forward. I think that there's a really nice sort of business logic to that.
yeah, like I think it's kind of like, I guess with any business, you obviously always start with your like core audience and then you scale out, right? You get those really like core supporters and then you branch out to reach new audiences. That's quite like a core like a business concept, I guess. But the way that I've thought about it is, I guess for some of it, as I say, even those who are not perpetrators, they might not necessarily opt in. Like we could provide all the free resources we want online. We could post whatever. We could send them tips. If they don't follow us, if they don't want to listen, then we're not going to reach them like that. So I have to do stuff that is, I kind of call it like not without an opt-in option. Without an opt-in kind of like approach, because this is why it's the workplace training, for example. It's like the kind of agreement is that, you say to your team, this is mandatory. I want everyone to know how to safely intervene. And within that process, we obviously, with a lot of strategy behind it again, but start to push this messaging of all the different elements to women's safety and to the inequality that we experience and to the mental load that goes into our lives and things like that. Because it's kind of like you just have to get them in a room, right? There's these people that are like, if you could get them in a room and talk to them in an approachable way, they would listen. But getting them into the room is the hard bit. And as soon as you start charging people or you start making people have to go to this, they're not going to do it because they don't have enough desire to yet. Like if there's people that are on the edge and they're on that point in the scale where like if they're told they will be open to listening, you kind of got to have no barriers to them accessing that stuff, right? And that's where the workplace training comes in, for example. Like if I can, well, I already have people signed up, but like if I can speak to founders or HR people or whatever and get them like, yes, we're going to make it mandatory because it's so important, then you kind of put it in front of people and it's like, oh, it's a few hours off work. Just listen. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to pay anything. You know what I mean? And this is how you start. And like even stuff that we're designing that's coming out in future. And a lot of our marketing and stuff is like, unfortunately, you shouldn't have to link back to someone you know, but it does often. I've had a lot of dads, for example, reach out to me even when I posted my LinkedIn post. I posted this, how it all started was I posted a LinkedIn post about my experience because I was just like, and I never used to post on LinkedIn, but I had so many men, like in the place that I worked, coming up to me and being like, I saw your post, I have daughters, or even just, I didn't realize this was still a thing, or it was so bad, or whatever. Because so many women obviously ended up commenting, being like, it's so tiring, it happens all the time, etc. And again, it's all designed to just bring as many people as possible into this conversation and be as accessible as possible, whilst I'm pushing relatively strong messaging. Like, everything's been thought through in a way that means that it is trying to bring everyone in and being like, for the sake of every woman in your life, for the sake of your daughters, for the sake of your colleagues that you value, like, just listen for like a few hours to what we have to say. And as I say, it's very much trying to design it in a different way and not come at it as, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, because if they don't do it anyway, we're not getting anywhere. It's instead about like really, like, even when I have conversations with my male friends, like I used to have 2 male housemates, and it's like, I'd often come back in and be like, oh, I just got harassed by this person, or like, I'm sick of this, or like that guy following me down the street or whatever. And I think, for example, like, they're both very, like, lovely people, but I think just living with girls and hearing girls, like, that they know and that they know who they are, and, like, they're not just a statistic, they're a real person. That's how you get people, and that's kind of how all our training is designed. So as I say, it's hopefully taking quite a different approach to maybe more traditional approaches when it comes to this stuff. And it's a lot, I guess, about like human behavior and psychology, and not feeling attacked, but feeling welcomed into the conversation and that kind of thing.
That's a really, really interesting angle and way of approaching it, because often historically, and I've been sent on various training courses, for example, working with respect or anti-sexual harassment training, they literally call it that. And you kind of go, I feel like I'm being dragged along to be re-educated. And I walk into a room and I know that it's effectively, you people over here need to change your behavior because you're bad people. And I think there's something interesting about approaching it in a much more inclusive way. And so the bits that I really liked in what you said there was that positive framing at the end of to sort of go, look, this is how you can help. So we want your assistance in that. So this is where the not all men thing comes through in the approach, is you're not labeling everybody as saying, okay, all of you are sex pests who need to be dealt with. Right? It's actually, let's have a proper conversation about this. And I think that's much more, ironically, you can exclude people, which is exactly the opposite of what you're trying to do in terms of the sort of society you want, if you marginalize people in the room. So I really like that positive approach. And I think if we can start to recognize, anytime we're lectured about who we should be, you need to do, it's a warm, welcoming thing. What you're talking about here is to say, here's a problem, like, here's how we can all help to solve it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's, as I say as well, like, it's very easy to see the statistics and switch off, like with anything, statistics, immigration, it's the same. Like, it's very easy for people to just not put people as humans, right, behind statistics. And that's part of what we're bringing into the training as well. It's kind of like, with the obviously permission of the people in the room, creating like a confidential space, but really just talking about real situations that people they work with every single day have gone through, because it starts to make it a lot more of like a reality. And I think, like, say if I go in, or when I used to work at my other job, and I go in and be like, this happened, and like, not that they wouldn't believe me, like they would, but it's also like, Amy talks about this stuff all the time. But I think if some of my other female colleagues, who just, they're not as like loud as me, or not as maybe open about talking about this stuff, like, I know every one of my colleagues, because we talked about it as women, have experienced it multiple times. And I think that starts to really hit. And when you hear like the actual story, like, this is what I was doing, I did all these things anyway to try and keep myself safe. As I say, like, my not last experience, because I've had more since then, but the experience that I've talked about here, it was 10:30 in the morning. It was broad daylight. I was on a public train. I wasn't down a dark street. All the things that people like to say is the reason that you've caused it or allowed it to happen, which obviously is a load not true, but it starts to be like, and I think that's partly why that one hit, because I think it was, oh, she was literally on her way to work in the middle of the day on public transport. And it happened still. And she said no, and she said go away, and no one helped her. And I think it's almost like dialing it down to have more of an impact. You know, if you start talking about, oh, I got dragged off in the street and, you know, I won't go into detail, but like it's hard for people to hear, firstly, as obviously it's far harder to go through it, but it's hard for people to hear. And again, they disconnect quite quickly because they're like, I would never do that in a million years. But when you can sit in a room with people that you see every day, I don't even think that it's no concern of mine that I will go into a room of 50 people in a workplace and all the women there will be like, nah, never happened to me. That's how certain I am, because I'm yet to come across a woman ever that has not had an experience, if not multiple. I got my nails done the other day, and the woman was asking me what I did for work, and I started telling her, and she was like, "Oh my god, that's so good." You know, it was just me and her in the shop, and she was like, "I think about this every day when I'm coming home from work at night." She was from Portugal, and she's like, I only lived in London for a bit, and I've yet to come across someone who can't relate, and it's so sad, but I think that's how you have to approach it, and like you said, like, you can't go in, like, insulting, and there's this, like, very famous, I wanna say sketch, but I guess it's not really a sketch, from Daniel Schloss, I think he's called, how you pronounce it, and he talks about, he's like, "Not all men are bad, but when 1 in 10 men are bad, we have to be part of the solution." Like, it's not, we like to talk about it as if it's like 0.0000001% of men. It's not. It can't be every woman and that fewer men. They can't be. They c they would they'd be exhausted. They'd be all over the world. Like, it's not this, it's so many people. Like, I can have it happen to me multiple times in one journey. It's not a few bad people. And I think that's why we've got to like kind of again, it's probably like statistically they kind of say 1 in 10. Obviously it's very vague because it's such, but 1 in 10 is still a very big problem when there's billions of people in the world. So everyone, as I say, everyone including women have to be part of the solution. And like what we do, as I say, in the workplace training, we'll be doing this scale. It's a lot of like visual, on your feet, kind of really like real life. It's not sitting having a lecture about how to not be a creep or whatever. Like, that's not what it's about. You know, it's really trying to like hit you hard and make you think and flip it and be like, yeah, I would never, you know, like if a man's walking down the street in shorts, would you ever go, who are you trying to impress? You know, if something happens to you, it's your fault. Like, no, you wouldn't. But you see a girl in a skirt, and that's a conversation that she will have countless times. And it's like, even if she's wearing her underwear, it doesn't mean you can do anything to her, even if she's naked. But it's just this, like, as I say, very like subtle flipping the narrative and that kind of thing that I think actually can drive the message home a lot more and just make people like notice it in day-to-day life a lot more. And there's so many little things that men can do to help, like very tiny things that would make such a difference. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to get across.
The way you were talking about there reminded me of something I read the other day, which was if you had a box of chocolates and you knew that 1 out of the 10 a box of chocolates was, and they used an unpleasant analogy, but they might be poisonous, not good for you, you'd be wary about the whole box of chocolates, right? Because you don't know which of the things are going to cause you problems. And so if we look at it in that way, then I think we can all play a part in trying to improve things and trying to solve that. So I love that kind of inclusive language, because if you want people to join the mission, then presenting it in a way that's easy for them to do, you know, this is what I really like, is you've got some easy steps for people to follow. So here's some simple things that you can do that will be applicable to your life, because you may not be in a situation where somebody's trying to obviously engage in violence, but you might spot a microaggression or something unpleasant where you can intervene. And so I like the fact that you're relating it to everyday life. You're giving people simple things that they can do. And so it's not a case of, well, yeah, I've always thought with something like first aid, it's interesting because we all recognize that there might be a situation that arises, but it doesn't happen that often. And so if you're approaching your thing of saying, I'm going to teach you a skill set, you kind of almost want to be practicing that skill set a little bit to make it relevant and fit. And so I love this idea of here's the big mission, but here's some accessible things that you can do. Here's how you can help us. Here's why this matters to you as much as it does to us. And I think that's really, really powerful.
I love that, obviously, that analogy. And I think this is the thing, like, it's not that women think all men are bad generally. It's that, like, you're walking down the street and if someone is following you or appears to be following you, you automatically have your guard up because that is ingrained in us as women from being so young. That also, not only is that there is it's not more likely than not likely, but there's still a relatively strong probability that that could happen, because I think the statistics in the UK at the moment are like, if you're 18 to 24, it's like 96% have experienced harassment or assault. And like, it's also the fact that if something does happen, you know you're going to be to blame. You know people are going to say, well, why are you walking down the street on your own? Because it happens all the time. And it's like, what am I supposed to do? Just not exist? I, I can't, like me and my colleague we both went to a networking event together, and she actually left earlier than me. And we both had an incident the same night coming back from that event, but at different times of the night, because she texts me and I text her like, well, it happened to me too. But hers was worse than mine. She got basically followed all the way to her door at home. And it was just like, as I say, I won't go into loads of detail because obviously that's her story and whatever. But it's like, in that situation, we were both at a networking event. Like, what are we supposed to do? Just like not go to these things? You kind of ask women to just like, okay, so you can't go out in the dark. Well, in winter, that's basically, you have to leave in the dark if you're going into the office. So what? I don't go to the office ever. Or like, you start to really restrict your life. And it's like, if you talk to most women who run, they won't want to run in the dark, or they'll take their partner with them or whatever. It's like, how limiting do you want to get on women's lives before you're like, nah, this is enough. We actually have to solve the problem. And this is the thing, like, you can do a million things. You can not wear, the things that they like to say cause it, which doesn't cause it, because people are sexually assaulted wearing, and there's a horrible thing, but there's a thing that says, the burqa said, yeah, it happened to me. And the nappy said, yeah, it happened to me too. And it's like, yeah, because it's completely irrespective of what you're wearing or whatever. It's just such a old sort of misinformation, I guess, around it. And yeah, this is the thing. It's like, women have to be on guard. They don't want to be. You don't want to like doubt men, but it's like anytime a man in public has a conversation with me, I'm immediately like, what is even if it's so friendly and so like, and it's not that I like to think people are inherently bad. Like, I have a very mantra that I like to think people are inherently good. But as a woman, you have to, because if something happens, firstly, you don't want something to happen. Secondly, if something does happen, all the questions are around why did you do that? Why didn't you do more? Why didn't why didn't you scream? Why didn't you? And it's like, in that moment, it's terrifying. So you can't just do those things. And yeah, I think that's, again, like this mental load thing that is often not really thought about or even talked about, because it's just so built into us. Me and my friends all have each other on Find My Friends. Like, my best friend texts me every time I'm not in my house, like, where are you? Are you okay? Like, every time I'm in a location that she doesn't know, because she worries. And like, I live by myself. So she is, obviously, I don't have someone waiting to check that I'm alive or whatever. And it's like, every time my sister comes to my house, her boyfriend comes to like, not pick her up, but meet her, because and it's just like, but these things we don't even think about, because that's just our lives. Like, that's very normal for women. Like, on nights out, we don't leave each other and this kind of stuff. And yeah, I think it's just, there's a point where it's like, we'll just sit inside and not do anything ever. That's the only way that we can and to be honest, even then you can't avoid it, because still something can happen. And obviously most things happen within the home anyway. So it's like, what do you want us to do?
It's interesting when you phrase it in those terms, because I think about, there are times when I, as a man, have felt vulnerable, right? So late at night, certain parts of town, whatever, times when I felt vulnerable. And I kind of just, that's stressful as hell. And if I take that and say, that is your permanent existence, then I'm not for 1 minute suggesting I have been anywhere near some of those things, but that sense of vulnerability, right, is not something that I can completely exclude from my own life. And so if I look at that and go, that is horrible, and you imagine that, not 24/7, but pretty much anytime you step outside the door, then you've got some sense of where this is coming from. And for me, that's the bit where starting to try and be a bit more empathetic and just go, okay, that undeniably, and we can see this as men in the interactions that we have with women. You'll get them backing off a little bit, whatever, and that's for understandable reasons. You've just explained it perfectly.
Not personal. It's through a lifetime of learned experiences and like from everything that's ingrained into us. And yeah, I think that's the thing. It's really not personal. And that's what also needs to be understood, and I think it, like you said, like men are vulnerable too, right? Like things happen to men and men do get attacked and assaulted and whatever. And I would never also want to take away from that. And like the hope is, because unfortunately, it's still statistically men who commit these crimes, who are perpetrators of these assaults and whatever, it should hopefully make the world safer for men too. Like it's not just making it safer for women, but also, like you said, I think this is a thing that, as I say, we're going to do a lot of like flipping the narrative in like our campaigns and stuff. But one of the examples I like to use is like, okay, if you're a man walking down the street and like another man was going, oh, smile, smile at me, like you would immediately be kind of like, but you might not feel maybe unafraid. You might just be like, but it's still annoying. It's still like, what the hell? That's so unnecessary. Right? And that doesn't happen to men barely ever. But like, you kind of get my point. And then it's like, if you're, I don't know, on public transport, and even if it was a woman, right, who came up to you and touched your leg or said something inappropriate, you might not be like, okay, I'm scared for my life, but you might be like, I feel really uncomfortable now. But imagine then if that situation happened, but it was the other way around, in the sense that women unfortunately know they, even if it happened the other way around, like where a woman did that to a man, it's still not even the same, because if a man does it to a woman, we know, firstly, statistically, what that's likely to lead to, whereas you have that fear in the back of your mind. It's not just. And the second thing is that we know, unfortunately, that especially older men have more power over young girls. Like biologically, generally, we're not going to be able to fight them off in the same way that you could if it was the other way around. So if you think about it, like, or even if that happened to me where a woman was stroking my leg or being weird or whatever, you'd still feel uncomfortable. You'd still be a bit like, oh, get me out of this situation. It's still not nice anyway, but it's more like you don't have that next thought of like, what's this going to escalate to the point where like, I'm not going to have any power in this situation. And a million thoughts go through your head. And I think, again, like it's things like that, not taken away from the fact that it happens to men, and also not taken away from the fact that, there is so much, not as much around sexual violence, but like so much violence between men, right? But again, it's the same problems. It's the same things that we have to, it's the way that the patriarchy has taught men to not show emotion, that other men and women then have to bear the brunt of it, because this causes a lot of like the domestic violence situations and all this kind of stuff. And what we're doing, focusing on root causes, is also making the world safer for men, even if it's not, maybe if it doesn't appear on the surface. And, it shouldn't take it to be that's your motive, but like it's making it safer for everyone, because unfortunately men are the perpetrators.
The bit I like about that, it's not a displacement exercise, right? Where you go, okay, if they're no longer attacking women, they're now going to attack men, right? Silly as that argument would be. It's about eliminating it. And I love this idea of we're just improving things for everyone. A bit like clean water, right? We just improve the general standard for everyone and make the world a safer place. Has to be a good thing. And I also like, as I think about some of the things you're talking about, how to intervene, as a useful skill in a ton of scenarios that aren't just relating to this. So this isn't a sort of like special case of something that only solves this thing. It has broader ramifications and implications. So if you were looking for, well, why should I be involved in this? Actually, there are some skills you can learn and some societal benefits that go way beyond the topic you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is, like you said, there's skills that can be applicable in other situations, like just if you're in a difficult situation or, in maybe a violent situation, about diffusing it or stepping in to help a mate that someone else is threatening to punch him in the face or whatever it is. Like there's, this is about, we use the term VAWG, which is violence against women and girls. But someone the other day did a post about it, and she was kind of saying it should be M at the beginning, because it's male violence that we're basically tackling here. I'm not saying it never ever happens the other way around, but what this stems from, well, firstly, it's the probability of it happening, of it being women compared to men, is it's such unique, rare cases, firstly. And secondly, again, this is tackling almost a much broader issue. And I say we start with public spaces because you have to start somewhere. But all of these root cause initiatives that we're tackling extend way beyond public harassment. They hopefully, if we can get in with boys early, they're less likely to develop, I guess, personalities that lead them to become abusers and things like that in maybe a domestic situation or just violent to other men. Like, there's so many, like you said, so many applications beyond women being safe in the street. It's hard because you kind of want to say, like, the brand is all about tackling male violence in a world where men are taught to not show emotion. Like, that is essentially tackling the root cause. But obviously, again, that's less digestible and less approachable. And yeah, we have to kind of be smart with how we do things. But male violence is a cause of a lot of, you know, if you want to get really like into it, it's like one of the reasons why pretty much every war in history has been started by a man and things like that. Like, I mean, it's this ego, it's the aggression, it's like not being able to deal with emotion. And again, like this is like a patriarchal thing, like it's the patriarchy and that's what it all stems from. And there's a lot of damage when it comes to men as well. So it's like it's beneficial for everyone to do this. Male suicide rates are so high. And a lot of it is because we don't allow, or the world isn't built for men to talk about the way they feel. And either it can lead to that or it can lead to this aggression being taken out largely on women. And this is why things like this are so important than just giving women some like whistle or whatever. Like, it's such a
It's inadequate as a response, right?
exactly.
Is there anything else before I let you tell people how they can help you? Is there anything else we should have talked about?
No, I don't think so. I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I'm northern, I can talk forever, so
And we love it, Amy. But listen, I want to say thank you for what you're doing, right? I have no idea how successful you're going to be. You are already making an impact. I think it's incredible. So do not let anybody tell you shouldn't be doing this. Just keep going. With that in mind, how can people join in, help? Tell them what they need to know.
So there's like literally tons of ways you can get involved. If you go to the HASSL website, which is www.hassl.uk.
Do you want to spell that out for people?
Yeah, HASSL. So HASSL, but without the E on the end. And it stands for Harassment Awareness and Safe Space Leaders. That's what the term stands for, but it also refers to the hassle of experiencing harassment, of reporting it, etc. And the end goal, as we've talked about before, is to make the world hassle-free. That's our plan. So if hassle didn't exist anymore, that would be end goal reached. But yeah, there's loads of ways to get involved. So you can go to the HASSL website. There is a page called Get Involved, which has a list of like 15 different things you can do. The key things are, I guess we might have just launched by the time, so you can support us with going in and shopping our funding streams, which at the moment will be merch and the workplace training. You can also, we have an ambassador program, which is women and allies from all over the world that you can join. It's a voluntary program where you can give as much or as little time as you want, and it's remote, so you can do it from home. And we have an amazing community of people. So yeah, you can apply to join that. Yeah, and there's also a survey, which again can be for anyone to fill in, and it very much is shaping all the initiatives that we're creating. It takes like 5 to 10 minutes to do, again on the website. And yeah, you can just talk about your experiences or any ideas you have, or give us any feedback. I read every single one, even though there's like 4,000 now. But I do read them all because they're so invaluable. And yeah, it's so important to make sure that we're constantly in tune with what I guess the audience and the community want. So yeah, they're the big ones, the big ways you can help. And obviously go follow us on socials as well, because
Amazing. I will put links to in the show notes. But all that remains to me, once again, I thank you for what you're doing. I think it's really, really important. I love both the way you're doing it, but the spirit in which you're approaching it, the sort of entrepreneurial nature. There is a serious topic, but there's a sense of fun and humanity behind it. And I love the way that you're thinking about the people that, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to change it? So there's a very human way of looking at it, which I think is wonderful. And I just think all the criticism that's thrown at you, ignore it, keep doing what you're doing. Absolutely brilliant. But above all right now, thank you so much for being an amazing guest on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and letting me go on.
My absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Amy for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Amy, her work at HASSL, how you can become an ambassador and support what she's trying to do, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, thanks for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review for it, please do so. It really, really does help. To discover episodes of the show, and there are over 300 of them that you might have missed, have a look at the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another discussion that I think you'll find fascinating, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, stay safe, take inspiration from what Amy is doing and the way she's going about it. And thank you so much for listening to what I think was a really important discussion